Well, it's 2 days later. Nothing's even better about that loss on Saturday. Still just as ugly, still just as bad, still just as embarrassing. And now it's Monday. Hooray. I don't mean to be too down about it. I'm getting my voice back, so I'm feeling better about that. I'm not going to push the mute button. If you watched the live show on Saturday, you know that went wrong in a big way. I had myself muted for some unknown amount of time. I haven't gone back to watch the tape and find out how long I was muted, but I was muted for a little while. Not today. If I have to cough, you will hear that cough, but at least you'll hear other words in and around the cough. All right, let's talk about the Pitt-Syracuse game. Maybe we'll talk a little bit of basketball, but we'll talk a lot of Pitt sports right here on the Morning Pitt on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. All right, it's Monday. It's the Morning Pitt. It's youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. I'm Chris Peak from Panther-Lair.com, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com, the most comprehensive source of Pitt sports news on the internet, football, basketball, and recruiting. You find it all at Panther-Lair.com and message boards to interact with all of your closest Pitt fan friends. All day, every day, Pitt fans are talking about Pitt sports on the message boards at Panther-Lair.com, and you could be there too. You may not be happy. You may be outright disgusted by the state of the football program, but let me tell you, there are a few hundred, maybe 1,000 other Pitt fans on the message boards at Panther-Lair.com that are just as disgusted as you are. And some, I can tell you, are probably even more disgusted, or at least they say they are, in the post after post after post after post that they make about how disgusted they are. But look, when you're 2-8, whatever the opposite of, whatever the opposite of, to the victor go the spoils. The opposite, equal and opposite reaction counts as well. When you're 2-8, it all rolls downhill on you, and it's all rolling downhill on Pitt right now. But at least we've got this. We've got a little chance to talk Pitt sports here to start every day right here on the Morning Pitt on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel so you don't miss any of our video content. These Morning Pitt videos, our weekly live show every Wednesday night at 8:30 p.m. with me and Jim Hammett. We go live for post-game shows as well after the football games. We will be live after the Boston College game this Thursday night. It might not start until like 11 or 12 o'clock at night, but we will be live. And look, we've done these Thursday night post-game shows before. You guys have turned out for it and showed up. So I'm counting on you being there as well when it's like midnight or 12:30 on a Thursday. And this would be Friday morning at that point, and we're doing shots and, trying to cope with another game. Good or bad, it feels like we're still just going to be coping at that point. So you don't want to miss that right here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. And then, retail therapy is a real thing. You are feeling down, go buy yourself something nice. And the best place to go buy yourself something nice, especially if you're a Pitt fan, is homefieldapparel.com. Go over to Homefield and check out their Pitt collection. It's some of the best stuff you're going to find. I mean, the designs are just outstanding. They look great. It's a great high-quality t-shirt or sweatshirt or joggers or dad hats or bomber jackets. All these different things that they've got at homefieldapparel.com. They're awesome, and you can get them right now for 15% off your first order. When you use the promo code LAIR23, LAIR23, you'll get 15% off your first order at homefieldapparel.com. Some of the best college sports gear that you're going to find. Their Pitt collection is outstanding. If you are too disgusted by it, they've got collections for like 150 other schools too. So they've got great stuff all over the place. Go look at it. I guarantee if you get something from Homefield, you won't be disappointed. Homefield, I can't guarantee that. That's not legally binding or anything like that. But I really think you have a high chance, a very, very high likelihood of not being disappointed. Homefieldapparel.com. Use the promo code LAIR23, LAIR23, and you can save 15% off your first order. So nothing got better. There's no sort of, all right, cooler heads prevailed a day later. Is Sunday, as we went through the game yesterday, just kind of sitting throughout the day yesterday and sort of re-looking at some of the things from the Syracuse game and trying to, figure this out or figure that out or how that game happened or why it happened or what it all means. There's no smoothing that one out. There's no gray area that could have gone either way. It was an outright disaster of a game. It was an embarrassing loss. And it was a game where, the bright spots were few and far between. Basically, the bright spots were Konate Mumfield and Bub Means. Malcolm Epps, maybe. I mean, there were so few bright spots in that game. It was just an abject disaster start to finish. Ben Sauls made his field goals, I guess. It was a disaster. And it was embarrassing. And it was probably the most embarrassing loss in the Narduzzi era, probably the worst loss of the Narduzzi era, which, if you're keeping track, it's now 3 years in a row that we have set a new low bar for this era and the worst losses. I mean, 2021, Western Michigan certainly achieved a new low. And it immediately became the worst loss of the Narduzzi era at Pitt, only to be surpassed a year later, and it took me a while to come around on this one, but to be surpassed a year later by the Georgia Tech game last year. Now I think we've stooped a step lower. Now, Syracuse is not like Georgia Tech, in that Georgia Tech had just fired their coach 5 days earlier, and Pitt was ranked, and welcoming Georgia Tech to Acrisure Stadium. This was a game on a neutral site. Syracuse had not fired their coach. But to get beat like they did, because Georgia Tech didn't really push Pitt around and manhandle them and dominate them the way Syracuse did, particularly Syracuse's offense, but even Syracuse's defense as well. I mean, Pitt was dominated by Syracuse, and that's not something that should happen. And it's not something I ever thought would happen, but it is absolutely what happened on Saturday. And, you know, I talked on Saturday about Dan Villari, the big tight end, number 89, the former quarterback who played tight end, who had 2 rushing attempts for 3 yards in the first 9 games this season, and then had, 17 for 154 against Pitt? Just unstoppable. Just unstoppable. He was Iron Man out there. And Pitt couldn't do anything against him. Even after they saw what Syracuse was trying to do, even after they understood, okay, Syracuse is running this. You know, you give up that first drive, that's bad. But okay, you saw it now. You understand, like, this is what they're doing. This is how they're going to attack. They can't throw the ball. You know, the passing game is not part of it. We don't need to worry about that. Every now and then they might try and hit us for one and catch us off guard. But the reality is we have to stop the run. Like, you saw it on the first drive. Now be ready to stop it. Make adjustments. And there were times where I thought they did. There were times where it looked like they made adjustments, and times where it looked like they were going to, figure this out or figure that out. It never lasted. It never lasted. Syracuse had 2 3-and-outs in the whole game. They punted on 4 consecutive drives, but it was a 6-play drive, a 3-and-out, a 5-play drive, a 3-and-out in the second quarter. One drive started in the first quarter. Their final drive of the first quarter ended up in a 6-play punt. First full drive of the second quarter, they went 3-and-out. Next full drive of the second quarter, they went 5-and-out, basically. And the final full drive of the second quarter for Syracuse, they went 3-and-out and gave the ball back to Pitt with like 36 seconds left to go. And so it seemed like they had kind of figured it out until they get to the second half. And Syracuse goes 9 plays for 52 yards. They go 8 plays for 61 yards and get stopped at the 3, I think. And then they go 2 plays for 34 yards after a fumble. They get it pretty easy. 12 plays for 54 yards, a drive that ends with a field goal attempt where they take almost 8 minutes off the clock. And then they, finish by turning it over on downs. Really running out the clock for 4.5 minutes. Pitt had 2 minutes of possession time in the fourth quarter. 2 minutes and 10 seconds of possession time in the fourth quarter, spread over, basically 2 drives plus 1 play. And that's all they had. And that was partially a product of the offense being unable to stay on the field and turnovers, certainly. But it was also defense just couldn't get off the field. Defense just couldn't make a stop. And Syracuse, they probably adjusted throughout the game, but Pitt never was able to really consistently stop it, and it was embarrassing to see. But here's the thing I keep coming back to, all right? For as bad as that defensive performance was, for as bad as it was to give up 300 rushing yards to Syracuse, probably even more, right? What was the final tally? 382? Excuse me. I'm underselling it considerably by saying they gave up 300 rushing yards to Syracuse. They gave up 400 rushing yards to Syracuse. And we could spend days talking about how bad that defensive performance was. But here's the thing. And I said this a little bit on Saturday, and I'm going to say it again, and I'm going to keep coming back to this point. Syracuse doesn't try all that goofy stuff they were doing. All right, they don't come out with that as their primary game plan if Pitt has an offense that even has a pulse. Okay, Syracuse knew they couldn't throw. They knew Garrett Schrader couldn't throw, and so he attempted 2 passes in the game. Dan Villari threw more passes. He threw 5, and Schrader threw 2. LaQuint Allen threw a pass. I mean, like, they knew the passing game wasn't going to be part of it. They knew they couldn't do that. But if you go into a game against a team that has any threat on offense at all, if you go against a team that has any kind of pulse on offense, you're not going to try to do that because you'll know that's not good enough. That's not going to be able to keep up with a team that could score, I don't know, let's get crazy, 3 touchdowns. It's not going to be enough to do that. It's not going to be enough that you'll be able to keep up in a shootout against a team that could score 3 or 4 touchdowns. They only had, in my opinion, Dino Babers didn't call me up and say, hey, Chris, listen, we only had the stones to run that offense out there because their offense is so bad. But I mean, really, if Pitt's offense had any kind of life, had any kind of effectiveness, was any kind of threat whatsoever to impact the game in a positive way, which it is not, they never would have tried that. Not to the extent that they did. They would have had some of those plays in. Villari would have had some wildcat plays. I'm sure they would have had direct snaps to LaQuint Allen. But they would not have made it their 99% of the play calls offense. It would not have been their base offense, their game planned offense like that. Because to do so against a team that has any kind of offense itself, it would have been conceding the game. Like, they wouldn't have tried to do that against North Carolina. I really believe that. They would not have tried to do that against Florida State. And not because they were intimidated by North Carolina's defense or Florida State's defense, but rather because they knew that there was nothing to worry about with Pitt's offense. Nothing at all. And they're right. They were right. They gambled on Pitt's offense not being able to score enough to make this a game that the Wildcat with Dan Villari couldn't win. And they were right. Pitt has scored 5 offensive touchdowns in the last 4 games. In 7 out of 10 games this season, they have scored 2 or fewer offensive touchdowns. That's an offense that does nothing, scares no one, has no threat whatsoever. And it's an embarrassment. And even a game like this, where the defense was gashed for 382 rushing yards. You know what the worst part of this team was? You know what the worst part of the game was? You know what lost the game? It's the offense. It's the offense again. Defense could have played better, for sure. Offense could have stayed on the field. You know how I just ran down that 3 and out count for Syracuse? I said they had 2 3 and outs all day. Pitt had 1, 2, 3, 4. Well, one of those. Okay, so they had 3. So they didn't have that many more. They had 5 punts, and they turned the ball over. They had a bunch of short possessions. They never had a long drive. They were just generally bad on offense. And the second half, I think, obviously it's where things fell apart. But for Pitt to go in the second half, fumble, punt, interception, which incidentally was returned for a touchdown, fumble, punt, fumble. That's 6 possessions. And they turn it over on 4 of them. And they go 3 and out and punt on the other 2. Yeah, I mean, I don't know, like, for as bad as the defense was, that's worse. That's worse. 95 yards of offense in the second half for Pitt. That's how you lost the game. You lost the game because you turned the ball over. You lost the game because you can't score. You lost the game because your offense stinks. And it has stunk since the beginning of the season. Since the Cincinnati game. With the lone exception being the Louisville game. It's bad. It's bad offense. And again, I mean, like, we're just repeating ourselves. I make fun of the guys on the message board who post the same things over and over again, and then I sit down here and I say, well, the offense stunk again, and it cost them the game. It's going to be very interesting to see what happens on Thursday night. Defending Boston College, stopping Thomas Castellanos is going to be a challenge. Garrett Schrader, who has no threat of throwing, ran pretty well against Pitt. Dan Villari obviously ran well against Pitt. Castellanos is faster. He's a dynamic player, dynamic rusher, and he's going to be good, and he's going to challenge this defense. But I got to say, that whole storyline secondary to figuring out and seeing what's going to happen at quarterback for Pitt. Because Pat Narduzzi to his credit, I mean, there's not a lot of things we can give him credit for this season, but to his credit, did not commit to Christian Veilleux as the starter going forward after the game on Saturday. And when he was asked specifically, is Christian going to be your starter on Thursday night? He said, we'll have to look at the tape and find out. Now, I know your first reaction may be, oh, that damn Narduzzi, always talking about looking at the tape. Why does he always want to look at the tape? Why is he, I'm so tired of hearing about looking at the tape. And I get you. I'm with you. But the reality is, if he was just trying to, if his mind is made up and Veilleux starting, he would not have tried to deflect the question. He would have said, no, Christian's still our starter. By saying we'll look at the tape and find out, he's leaving the door wide open for another quarterback change. And if you read anything I wrote last week or heard anything I said last week, you know that I'm pretty well in favor of that. I would say that's okay. What I advocated for and what I would probably continue to advocate for at this point is, rotate. Play one guy the first quarter, the other guy the second quarter, and go back and forth until one of those guys plays so well that you're like, all right, that's my guy. I got to stick with him. Which, to be fair, would be kind of like what Christian Veilleux did in the first half on Saturday, but certainly the second quarter. I think the second quarter was probably his best performance of that game. 7 of 12 for 126 and a touchdown. But I mean, even the first half as a whole, he was 11 of 18 for 149 and a touchdown. I mean, that's a good stat line. 11 of 17, excuse me. That's, you project, if you could match that in the second half, you'd be 22 of 34 for right about 300 yards and 2 touchdowns. A great stat line. Take that for sure. But of course, he didn't match that. He had 2 fumbles and an interception. They went for a pick 6. And the thing I've sort of contended or maintained over the past really probably 5-6 weeks is that I don't know how long Christian Veilleux can survive as Pitt's starting quarterback if he continues to commit those kind of turnovers. Narduzzi will stomach a lot of things, but if you turn the ball over, if you commit a lot of turnovers, that patience runs out. And I think it ran out after Veilleux's second fumble on Saturday. Which came after a pick 6, which came after another fumble. And the 2 fumbles were both on exchanges that could have been pulls or reads or I don't know what it was. And maybe they're running a kind of offense that Veilleux's not really comfortable running, that Kenny Johnson's not really comfortable running, that Rodney Hammond's not really comfortable running. Or they just don't have a good feel for each other. Maybe they haven't practiced it enough. Whatever it was, the ball ended up on the ground, and Syracuse ended up recovering it. And that was 3 turnovers for Veilleux. And then Pitt ended up with 4 turnovers in the game because Rodney Hammond was ruled to fumble on the Nate Yarnell drive. But it seems like a very real possibility and maybe even likelihood that we're going to see Nate Yarnell on Thursday night against Boston College. For better or for worse. And I should say, and I'll probably do a whole episode on this, just on this quarterback situation tomorrow or Wednesday or sometime in there. I mean, I should say, sometimes we start talking about Nate Yarnell, and I talked about the quarterback situation a lot last week, and people were like, boy, everybody just, some people said, wow, everybody just assumes Nate Yarnell is going to be great. I don't know what Nate Yarnell is going to be. I don't know how he's going to play. I don't know how he would do for a full game under pressure, playing an ACC game with a full playbook, trying to be aggressive, not like what they did against Western Michigan a year ago. I don't know. I don't know what he would do. But I do know that I want to find out. I do know that I want to see it. I do know that I want to see him have some consistent time on the field and go into a game believing, expecting to be that guy and expecting to lead the offense. I mean, there were points on Saturday. There was one clip, and I wrote it down. They were showing something on the Pitt sideline, and Yarnell was sitting with, the punters. And I forget if Pitt's offense was on the field. I mean, probably not. It must have been a defensive series or something. But he's sitting with, the punters and the backup long snapper and stuff like that. It's like, you're not ready to go. And so, because I think you go into a game, there's a backup mentality and there's a starter mentality. I want to see Nate Yarnell with a starter mentality, a week of starter reps and a week of starter prep, go into this game as the starter and see if he can beat an ACC opponent. and just win one freaking game for this team. I mean, I know he's already won one game for this team, but I mean this season. Win a game for this team. They need to win. Like I said, nothing felt any better 2 days later. We talk about that game on Saturday. It's still pretty fresh, still pretty embarrassing, still pretty bad. So we got a couple days here to get ready for Pitt Boston College on Thursday night, but we'll have lots of content as always at Panther-Lair.com and right here on YouTube.com/Panther-Lair.com. So like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel. That way you don't miss any of our YouTube content, our Pitt video content, or our live streams or anything like that. And then head over to Panther-Lair.com for all the Pitt coverage there. Promo code LAIR23 will get you 15% off your first order at HomefieldApparel.com. So make sure you check that out as well. HomefieldApparel.com, promo code LAIR23. Thanks so much for tuning in today. Sometime we'll have something better to talk about. Maybe tomorrow we'll talk about hoops. How about that? Pitt has a basketball game tonight against Florida Gulf Coast. Didn't even get to talk about it. We'll talk about that tomorrow on the Morning Pitt. So you have that to look forward to right here on YouTube.com/Panther-Lair.com.